Welcome to the Deeper Into Movies podcast. My name is Stephen T. Hanley. I'm the founder and lead curator of Deeper Into Movies. We're a pop-up cinema based in London and New York. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Todd Field. Todd Field, the writer, director, and actor. He's made 3 perfect movies: Tar, Little Children, and In the Bedroom. 3 for free. I think he's a visionary auteur director. I urge you to check out his 2 previous movies if you've not seen them. I think they're just fantastic. Super lucky to get time with Todd as he's super busy in award season for Tar. And it was great to talk to him. He's such a fascinating guy, very mysterious. And we get into it about working with Kubrick, the world of classical music, and where he's been for the last 10 years. This is his first movie in forever. And I'm glad he's back. Here's me and Todd Field. Hey, how are you?
Oh, good. Sorry, I'm technically challenged this morning. I apologize. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Weirdly, I was talking to my podcast music composer yesterday, who works under the name Telephone Tel Aviv, and he did the music in Newport South, which you were in.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
So he worked with John Hughes' son.
Yeah.
And with Kyle. Kyle actually was called out on this film. If you look at the very first credit card of acknowledgments, Kyle Cooper is on there. He directed Newport South, and he also did me a great favor on my first film with the opening credits, and then sort of advised us in terms of creating the credits for this film.
Yeah, they did all the music in the film as well for the kid in the movie who's making all the cool electronic and ambient music. That was all them.
Yeah, I remember that very well. That's incredible. Boy. Well, send my regards, please. That feels like yesterday, but I know it was a long time ago.
Yeah, but what makes it even stranger for me is we're always talking movies, and he kept on talking about In the Bedroom. And then I was like, oh, I think I've seen it. That's the one with the, what was it? The woman with leukemia. And he was like, no. And I was like, wait, that's Marvin's Room. So
that's Marvin's Room.
That's
Marvin's
Meryl
Room.
Streep.
Meryl Streep and Leo DiCaprio.
Yeah. And then I got and then he kept on going on about it again. And I was like, no, this is the one with Steve Guttenberg doing Rear Window. And then that was The Bedroom Window.
A Bedroom Window, yeah.
And then he's like, no, family, grief, revenge, Marissa Tomei, Sissy Spacek. And so then I was like, I don't think I've seen it. And he was like, watch it. And so I watched that over lockdown, and the second I saw the font you used on the title sequence, I kind of sat up a bit and thought, this is going to be amazing. And then it completely blew me away. And then the following day, I had a similar moment when I watched Little Children and I heard the narration. Again, I don't know if you ever had those moments, you probably have in cinema, when those small details just spike your attention and you know this is going to be something special.
Wow. Well, that's wonderful to hear. I'm glad that those are both things that happened at the beginning of both those films. And in terms of those opening credits on The Bedroom, that's specifically what Kyle helped me with, amongst other things,
that's
which
so
was
strange.
I had set that up. I sort of mocked that up exactly like what you're seeing in an Avid, but we shot on film and we finished on film, and to do that on film. Not to get too digressive, but to do that on film, the problem is you have to do sort of lap dissolves. So they used to have some in the lab. They would have an A, B, C, D roll potentially, and so you'd have to run them simultaneously to marry the credits so that you didn't have to do an optical, and then it would just get grainy. And you see that in a lot of old movies, when they've gone back and and you've lost a generation. So I went to Kyle and said, "Can you help me with this and one other thing, some simple removal of an item that oughtn't to be there." And he said, "Yeah, I'll do it." And he did. And that was a very lovely and friendly thing to do for him. And he refused to let me pay him for it. So,
And sticking with opening credit sequences, you've stacked what is normally your end credit sequence at the beginning of Tar.
yes.
I was wondering, what was your intention behind this?
Well, the Tar deals with the themes of power and what power does, the ugly stick of power and whoever holds it, what that does to someone. But no one gets handed the ugly stick. That they have to, sit atop a power structure, and that power structure are human beings, and so just thematically, it seemed like the right thing to do. Also, when I was writing the film, it was the beginning of the very first lockdown in the world, and like everyone else, we were all sort of streaming, probably a lot more than was probably healthy for us, and looking at movies 24/7, and if you watch Netflix, you get to the end credits, they fly to the upper right-hand corner of the screen. And if you've worked in film for any number of years, there's a good chance you know people that have worked on films, and it's always fun to look and see.
Of course, yeah.
And so you always scramble for your remote to try to push it to get back to, and then rewind to watch the end credits. And it's like I have a real problem with that, because if a company is going to go to the trouble of making a film and according people their due, then they should have the opportunity to be seen as much as anyone else. It's a collaborative art form, and it takes many, many, many hands and minds and hearts to make a film. And otherwise, they just shouldn't be cynical about it. They just should simply not credit people. But that's absurd as well. So that was sort of the idea.
Yeah, I can't stand when it goes to since you've watched this, watch this. And I'm like, no, I want to see who the DOP and the composer was, and what was the song I thought I recognized in the end credits.
Yeah, and who the lead makeup person was. I mean, sometimes you'll watch a movie, an older film, and I'll say, "Oh, look, there's Bud Westmore." Well, I worked with Monty Westmore, and the Westmore brothers were famous. They go all the way back to like Treasure of the Sierra Madre. I mean, these are people that worked on thousands of films. And it's thrilling to even if you're just a cinephile to be able to look at different names and think about the different people that collaborated, on things. So,
yeah, it's so thrilling, especially if you see a film that looks incredible, and then you see the DOP, like, that's why, they had whoever shooting it.
Indeed, absolutely.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Mubi. Mubi is a creator streaming platform for movie lovers. I've been a Mubi subscriber for years, and I want to give you 3 recommendations from the Mubi UK platform. Okay, Souvenir Part 2 by Joanna Hogg. Really fantastic. The most accurate representation of going to film school. And not always in a good way, but man, that was really fantastic. Makeup, 2019, Claire Oakley. I love this movie. I saw it in the Curzon when it first came out. It's all set in a caravan park, and it's really sinister and spooky. kind of Lynn Ramsey doing a horror movie in a caravan park. And Funny Ha Ha by Andrew Bajowski. Basically the first Mumblecore movie. He was the originator, so do that. You can try Mubi for 30 days for free at mubi.com/deeper into movies. That's mubi.com/deeper into movies for a whole month of cinema for free. But obviously start with those three that I just recommended. Okay, good. What came first for your initial idea? The world of classical music, a composer, a downfall? What was your spark of an idea?
It was really about this character. I've been thinking about her for many, many years with no place to house her because um, I'm lucky to be employed as a writer, but 99.9% of the time I'm employed to adapt material. There's always IP involved. So this was an opportunity where the studio came and said, sort of vaguely, would you ever think about writing something set in the world of classical music with a conductor? And I thought, sure, and they didn't make me pitch it to them. They didn't ask me to beat out an outline or anything. They just cut me loose. And it was the beginning of the pandemic, and I had this character, and I thought, I've got some place to put her now, and how perfect, right? Because it's so abundantly clear that what the power structures are and the lines are, if you have somebody playing a conductor. I mean, and that's not a new thing. I mean, there's famous examples of that in early Hollywood, like films like Deception and things like that. Often classical music was set as a very dramatic or melodramatic backdrop for misbehavior, and people abusing their power and things like that. So I'd never thought of putting her there. I'd always kind of thought her saw her, from my notebook pages as sort of like running a major media company or an energy company or something like that. But this was handy. And so that's sort of how it started.
And weirdly, yesterday I went past Madame Jojo's in Soho, which
is sadly closed.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah, well, they closed it. They closed it down on some sort of cooked up charges that somebody had a fist fight in the street outside of Madame Jojo's, as if that was.
No, they wanted the real estate.
They wanted the real estate. Yeah. Soho's not the same without Madame Jojo's. Next thing they'll close down the Algerian coffee shop on Old Brompton Street, and then we'll be in real trouble.
That's still there. Yeah. All the comic book stores and record stores used to be there in the 90s, and my brother would take me on these cool trips, but he'd always be like, keep your head down for the next block or so, and then we'll buy some records and have McDonald's. But those sleazy Soho days are long gone.
Yeah, it was a different world down there. I mean, I remember being chased by some of the girls that would sort of, display themselves outside certain clubs, and I remember, and there was a whole section of Soho where it was just at night where they just openly sold drugs. It's just like, it was just, it was a very, very different world, much the same, as sort of Times Square was when I lived in New York, and instead of the sort of Disneyfication of Times Square that we have today.
Yeah, it was kind of dangerous. Do you remember that amazing Mona Lisa, the Neil Jordan film? That's a really great snapshot of that era.
You're so right. And that's such a great movie.
Larry Clark was going to remake that, and he came super close, and then the money got taken away at the last minute, which really sad.
Really?
Yeah.
That would be interesting. That would be an interesting film to see remade.
I'd like to put that through the Larry Clark lens. It'd be a really interesting piece. Big question, but what did you learn from Kubrick?
I think I learned a lot of things that I kind of already suspected. Mainly he confirmed a lot of ways of working process that I'd already employed in film school, and that's about priority. How do you prioritize a process? And I think that's hard because filmmaking can be very industrial with a lot of supposed know-how and over professional. And Stanley was a true amateur, I mean, he was very suspicious of the accepted wisdom of any process or tool, so he was always innovating. He also put his focus on uh, preparing extensively, and so that once the work began, he was focused on the people in front of the camera, and that was really all he was focused on. He also, I think, had um, the good sense, obviously, given what he achieved, that would confirm those methods, which was, he was also suspicious of himself. He he liked to work on a film for a good period of time because he didn't make many films. Um, and so he always wanted to be able to rediscover the film every day. It wasn't like he came in and stuck to a plan, and that, because of the nature of filmmaking, as a practical matter, it's very expensive. People
Hmm.
want plans and they want you to stick to them, So he was prepared enough to where he could be nimble and change within a certain, frame he'd set for himself, or a container of uh, a possibility for himself, but he could still change it on the spur of the moment if he wanted to, and that I think was the great genius of Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, I know a lot of people said everyone talks about how many takes and how meticulous he was, but I also read he said that when you're on set and you're shooting the movie and you're capturing the movie, why the hell are you going to rush it? Why aren't you going to explore every possible way of shooting something? So when you get to the edit process, you've got so many different colors and takes ready.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah. I think that, much has been made over the years about the multiple take things. And even
Mm-hmm.
some directors have tried to build their reputations on, oh, now I do multiple takes too. But I don't think that they necessarily understand why Stanley did that. I think that a lot of the noise that came out of that were from actors who had never been on stage. They weren't trained actors. They were film actors. I don't think you would have heard a great deal of the British cast that Stanley used to ever talk about that. Because when you do multiple takes, as he did,
Mm-hmm.
if you broke it down to what those movie stars were used to, doing 6 takes of coverage from 6 different angles, the amount of takes that Stanley did compared to a normal filmmaker was the same. The only difference was that these film actors didn't get to do, 10 takes on one angle and take a break and go have a cigarette and then come back and do the medium shot and come back and do a long shot and come back and do a detail, et cetera, et cetera. Stanley was doing it all in one, but the amount of times that the performer had to execute was precisely the same. The only difference was that they didn't get a smoke break. And
Right.
the advantage of that for Stanley was a sense of discovery, but also through repetition, as any actor will tell you, there's a certain point where there's diminishing returns, but once you break through those diminishing returns, just like you would do on the stage after rehearsing something, in week 6, something strange starts to happen, and that's what Stanley was interested in, was what that strange thing was. But you can't just go straight at that strange thing; it has to evolve. He wasn't interested in reality. Like, reality was the last thing he was interested in.
And how was the spectacular masked ball scene? How long were you shooting that for?
Oh, the mass ball scene. I may misremember this, but there were 2 sets for the mass ball scene. So one we shot out in Elvenden Castle near Bury St. Edmunds, and all the beet fields out there, that sort of area. And that's a very interesting um, piece of architecture, and incredibly impressive. But an interesting history in that during World War II, it had been repurposed to house American flyers. So Jimmy Stewart's where that ceremony is taking place, Jimmy Stewart slept on a cot on that floor. Uh, so there was that location, and that was done in one particular section of the filming, which is I think the fall of '97. And then we didn't get to the rest of the so-called, ceremony scene until January of '98, and that was
Whoa.
done out at a different location, which is in Hertfordshire.
Luton Hall near there?
No, no, no. Luton is the first location, and that's where we started
Oh,
it.
right.
We started that in October of '96. But I would say it was probably a couple of months, altogether for that sequence, if I'm remembering correctly, but I could be wrong.
And after watching your first two films and being so in awe of your filmmaking, thankfully I didn't have to wait too long for after my discovery of you for Todd to come out. But I was wondering, what were you doing in those years in between? I've read about a Blood Meridian adaptation and a Franzen adaptation.
Yeah, well, in the case of those things, Blood Meridian, I tried to get the rights to that for a very long time. Ridley Scott had them, and he was kind enough to say, "Okay, have a go." And I had it set up at a studio, but the budget was just untenable. There was no way, and there was no reason to do that, to make a film out of Cormac McCarthy's book unless you do it properly.
Mm-hmm.
So I abandoned that idea, and then yeah, I had, there were many other things in the interim years, but yes, Jonathan Franzen, Daniel Craig, David Hare, and a host of other people. We had a writer's room, and we worked for a year to adapt John's book Purity, for a television series. But again, we wrote 1,200 pages, and it would have been absolutely extraordinary. We loved it. We worked 7-day weeks, but but the budget was too much for the network to stomach, so we abandoned that. They wanted us to cut it down to like 6 hours, and none of us were interested in doing that. So yeah, there were a lot of projects that were extremely ambitious, that required certain resources that just weren't there, and that's the short answer.
Okay, this is a strange question. Why the New York Rangers cap?
Well, Tar, comes from a borough of New York. Linda comes from a borough of New York, in Staten Island, out near Fresh Kills. Um, and part of her childhood was, one of them was, she's from an immigrant family. Her first entryway into music was, playing an instrument that you often find, in first or second generation immigrant families, because it's not too expensive, it's portable, and it's also part of a tradition, which is the accordion. And her second occupation was hockey. She's a big hockey player. So
Right.
if you look closely, uh, um, if you had any interest of looking really closely at her wall, you'll see a young Lydia Tarr with a black eye with a hockey stick. So she's a big hockey fan.
That's amazing. I love that attention to detail. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. This has been such a pleasure. You're such an incredible filmmaker. I can't wait to see what you do next.
Well, you're very kind, and I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you, buddy. Take care.
Okay, you too. Bye bye.
Boom. That was me and Todd Field. What a guy. I wish I had more time because he's literally a walking encyclopedia when it comes to the making of Eyes Wide Shut and Stanley Kubrick's practices. And he's a master filmmaker in his own right. Once more, I'm going to say it. If you haven't seen In the Bedroom or Little Children, and you've already seen Tar and you've dug it, go back and dig out those previous movies. They're absolutely fantastic. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Joshua Eustace, aka Telephone Tel Aviv, for my beautiful music, and for turning me on to the movies of Todd Field. Okay, that's it, and we'll speak soon.